All right.
Alrighty, so thank you everybody. I'm Eric Preston with Blackboard, Senior Staff Software Engineer. Been with Blackboard. Well, let's see, hang on a second. Let me do this official like. Before we get started, I'm just going to do the legalese stuff that I might be talking about stuff we haven't released yet, so you can't hold us liable for it, although I think everything I'm going to talk about is currently available. My name's Eric Preston, been with Blackboard for over 14 years. I'm on the IMS Global LTI and Caliper technical working groups. Sometimes I attend the Edu API working groups as well. And I'm on the developer relations team with Scott Hurry, whom you may know because he's been with Blackboard forever, running DevCon and other conferences around the world for our developers. So this talk is about LTI Advantage from the vendor perspective, from the platform perspective. So I've been on the LTI working committee for 5 or 6 or plus years now, and so I was involved with the LTI 1.3 and LTI Advantage specification from the very beginning, as were most, if not all, of the major LMS vendors, many tool vendors, and so on. So LTI Advantage has been out for 2.5 years now in production. We feel like it's being very successful, and we're very happy with the specification. If you went to Claude Vervoor's talk this morning, early at 9 Eastern time, he talked about the future of LTI Advantage, and there's a lot of companion specs and additional capabilities that we are constantly adding to LTI. But in this talk, we're going to talk about what's available today in our implementation at Blackboard with the Learn LMS system. So we'll talk about registering a tool. And we'll talk about LTI placements, which aren't really part of the specification, but they're critical to getting LTI working in any platform. We'll talk about deploying a tool, which is separate from registering the tool. Certainly in Blackboard, it's a separate step. And then we'll talk about the various LTI services that make up LTI Advantage. There's not going to be a lot of slideware today. It's going to be mostly demo, but we're going to do a few slides here to set the stage. The first thing to note is that with LTI registration, we need a lot more stuff than we did with LTI 1.1. With LTI 1.1, we had a shared key and a shared secret that usually the tool vendor created and shared either on a napkin or email or smoke signals with the platform. And then at the end of the day, a platform needs a URL to launch to. At the end of the day, a platform is going to do an HTTP form post to a tool as a web UI flow from one web application to another via the browser user agent. Well, those days are over because there's a lot of security issues around that, in addition to the signing mechanism that was being used. And so we needed to modernize LTIs. But now, unfortunately, with modernizing things, we've complicated things a little bit. And so we need 10 pieces of information eventually to exchange between the tool and the platform. And the platform needs the OpenID Connect log initiation URI, to prevent cross-site request forgery attacks. It needs a redirect URI or one or more, which is where we do the launch, where we do the form post. It needs a JWKS URL so that it can get the tool's public key set, because the tool is going to assign messages that it sends to the platform with its private key, and we use the tool's public key, which is publicly available, hence the term public key, to validate that signature. And then we have to agree on a signing algorithm that's used along with that private key to sign any messages. The tool needs pretty much the same set of things, plus a couple of extra things. It needs an issuer. This is part of the LTI launch is an OpenID Connect launch. So we follow the OpenID Connect standard to do a launch so that we weren't reinventing a wheel. And part of the OpenID Connect launch is defining an issuer. It's who is issuing the keys that are signing this request. And in this case, it's Blackboard.com. In Canvas's case, it's a different issuer. It might be the institution in the Moodle case or the Sakai case. The tool needs a client ID. So this is the identity of really the tool is the client in this case. And then we need an auth URL for handling this OpenID Connect login initiation. And we also need an OAuth 2 bearer token URL. If the tool is going to make service calls back to the platform using names and roles or assignment and grades, it uses OAuth 2 and a bearer token. So it needs a URL from which to get the bearer token. It also needs the platform's public key set URL just for the same reason the platform needs it. The platform is going to sign messages with its private key, and the tool is going to validate those with its public key. It needs to agree on a signing algorithm. And last but not least is the tool needs a deployment ID because there can be multiple deployments for a given client ID. And we'll talk about that more later. So this is how it works in Blackboard. You have an LTI tool over here that's got that information that it needs we just looked at. You've got Blackboard. Well, you've got a bunch of Blackboard Learn instances over here. There might be 1,000 of them in the world. There might be 2,000 of them in the world. And those Learn instances need all that information to talk to the tool. But rather than exchange that information with every Learn instance on the planet, which is a lot, we have the tool exchange that information once and only once with what our central service that we call the Blackboard Developer Portal. And this is very important because this is different than other platform vendors do today, but other platform vendors are likely to adopt this model in the future. Certainly D2L's Brightspace and Instructure's Canvas are likely to adopt this model of a central registration service. And the advantage there is that you have to exchange this information with Blackboard once and only once, and it reduces the opportunity for errors, and it reduces the amount of work that a Learn system administrator has to do because they don't really care about any of this information, and they don't want to have to exchange this information because it really has no meaning to them. The only thing that you're going to exchange with a Learn instance is this client ID that we give you. We generate a client ID for you so that you know that this tool is for Blackboard, but you don't know which instance of Blackboard it is. You just know that that LTI launch is for Blackboard, and then the way you know what instance it is through the deployment ID here, and that's all in the spec. And the spec is very clear that there could be multiple deployment IDs for an individual client ID. The reason behind that originally was because you might have a Learn instance at an institution that has multiple colleges, and each college has a different license with the tool, and so you would need a different deployment for those colleges within that one instance of the LMS, whether it's Canvas or Brightspace or Sakai or Moodle or Learn. We took that a step further, that because we're not sharing keys and secrets, we don't need to store this shared key and secret in the Learn instance. We're doing this all through asymmetric public-private key pairs, and Blackboard is responsible for generating those. The University of Wisconsin or the UCLA is not responsible for generating the public and the private keys. Right? Blackboard is responsible for that because Blackboard owns the code and Blackboard is managing these instances. So when we look at the UI real quickly, you go to our central service, developer.blackboard.com, you enter the information that the platform needs, and including a name and a description, which we require, but you need the login initiation URL, tool redirect URL, JWKS URL, and the signing algorithm. So those are the four pieces that I had in that slide, and then the tool is going to get an OIDC auth request endpoint, an auth token endpoint, public key set URL issuer application ID, which is the client ID. It's because we're sharing the same mechanism, we're sharing the same central service for our proprietary REST API, our public REST API communication, which uses OAuth 2 and bearer tokens the same way that LTI does. But the security model is just slightly different. It's still a client credentials grant, but in this case, we have a key and a secret. It's not shared, but we give you a key and a secret to use with that application or client ID. And that, again, that client ID uniquely identifies your tool with Blackboard. So now you have done this once and only once, and now you've got an application ID, and you would then share that with the institution that you're deploying your tool with. But before you do that, the next step for any LMS is somehow you need to surface your tool as a hyperlink in the platform's UI. And that has always been out of scope of the spec because every platform does it differently. It's a UI thing, you know, so we've never been able to formalize the concept of what Blackboard calls placements. But Canvas has the same it's the same concept. D2L, Brightspace, Moodle, Sakai, they all have the same concept of a placement, whether they call it a placement or not. We call it a placement because it's where it's placed in the user interface. Where does the instructor access your tool? Where does the student access your tool? In our case, you can insert a link to your tool in what we call the course outline, or you can embed a link inside the rich content editor. And again, these are all things you can do in all the other LMSs, but we just haven't had a way to standardize it. So what we've done with Blackboard is in the same central service, because it's the tool vendor that knows where they want these URLs to appear in the platform, the LMS UI, is that in the same place where you just registered your tool, you could also register one or more LTI placements, and you give it a name and a description, and you give it a type. And in Blackboard, we have 6 types. We have deep linking that can show up, allows you to launch to a tool, select some content, and that content then gets inserted into the course outline, or it gets inserted into the rich content editor. Or we just have the old school, the original 12 years ago LTI link, which is just a link to a resource, and that's can be gradable or not. And that's what is the classic LTI resource link. It's a direct link to a chapter in a book or to a quiz or to a video. We highly recommend that people use the deep linking flow today so that the user can use the tools UI to select and create content that then gets put back into the LMS. There are course placements that don't show up in the outline. They show up in the outer course shell, if you will, because they're not necessarily LTI tools that a student has to process through as part of going through the syllabus. They're just like a calculator tool or a course evaluation tool or something like that. And then we've given you 2 more places that you can have LTI links: at the system level outside of a course, and at the admin level for system administrators only. And the last 2 are really specific. There's a new specification out there for proctoring, which is at the bottom, and those are really specific just to proctoring vendors. And so they're not a generic, just shows up anywhere in the UI. They're real specific for proctoring, and I apologize if you hear the noise in the background. It's the garbage collector. And then there's UEF, and our Ultra experience allows you to extend that experience as a third-party developer and basically take over. You'll have access to a panel in the Ultra UI where you can embed your LTI tool, and it can kind of do whatever it wants in that panel. It can display help text. It can do a status message. There's lots of things you can do. It's kind of like JS Hacks for Ultra, although you can't really rewrite the Ultra UI, but you can enhance the Ultra UI with getting access to little panels within the UI, adding extra menu items to the course details area, etc. All right, so now you define these in the central service. So you only define them once. And again, you're not asking 2,000 Learn system administrators to configure links in their system for your tool. They just synchronize all this data with one click of a button. And what they do is they go to the admin, they go to LTI integrations, and they enter that client ID that you were issued. Sorry, I clicked it. I always try to click on the page and that page is forward. So they enter the client ID that you gave them, and it then displays all the information about your tool here, and they can specify whether they want it approved or not. And they can set up institution policies such as, are they going to give the tool access to the gradebook? Are they going to give the tool access to the membership service, the course roster? And what information about the users are they going to send? Are they going to send any personally identifiable information across on the launch? And then we issue that Learn instance a deployment ID. So that is the actual deployment instance of your tool in a unique, specific Learn instance. And that they would then exchange with you. Now, Canvas has the same thing, D2L Brightspace has the same thing. Everybody has to support this concept of deployment ID. But because the other LMS vendors make you exchange all this information with each instance of the LMS, then you get that deployment ID at the same time that you're exchanging the other information. In our case, you exchange 9 pieces of information with Blackboard in the central service, and then you exchange the client ID with the Learn instance administrator, and they give you the deployment ID. So we think we've simplified the registration and deployment considerably over other LMSs. Now, for those of you who did attend Claude's talk this morning or have been in the LTI working group, there is a new specification coming out called dynamic registration, which allows you to enter a URL that then it negotiates all those pieces of information by sending JSON blobs back and forth. So that greatly simplifies the deployment, the registration and deployment. We simplified it by putting it into a central service before there was a dynamic registration spec, because 2.5 years ago, there was no dynamic registration spec. We will support the dynamic registration, and what we will do in this case is that you will still register your tool with the Blackboard developer portal once and only once, and then a client will either have a UI that can see all the tools that are registered with that central service, or they will still have to enter a client ID. But then we'll have a button here that supports the dynamic deployment specification, where it will then just automatically send that deployment ID to the tool if you support that. Alrighty, so that's how, see, I jumped ahead. This is all that information about the dynamic registration. So that's all the setup to how you get things registered and working with Blackboard Learn. Now let's look at how it actually works in Blackboard Learn. So I will go to, let me see if I can move this window. I can't. Oh, I can just X out of this window. So I'm going to go to, well, we'll start at the developer. We'll start at the developer blackboard.com. So it's a central service anybody can go to. It's a self-service. You sign up, you create an account, you log in, and you get a list of all your applications. You create an application, you give it a name, turn it in, Feedback Studio, blah, TII.com. You say it supports LTI 1.3. You give it a URL. For the login initiation, the tool redirect, the JWKS, they're all part of the spec. Agree on a signing application, and you register that application. And now you're given all this information we've talked about, and you copy those and you paste them into your tool configuration. Your tool has a database of LTI configurations, right? And so you would paste all this information in there, it would update your database, and you would have all this information that you need. And you do that once, and then you never have to do it again for the life of the tool. And when you go to register with an LMS instance, you take this application ID, you copy it to your clipboard, and you email it, but there's nothing proprietary, there's nothing insecure about this because we're not exchanging secrets anymore. We're really just exchanging the old key, but not the secret part. And then I go in as a system administrator to Blackboard Learn. And I like to do that as a different user ID. So we'll say, and if I go into the admin section and LTI tool providers, and I register an LTI Advantage tool, all I need to do is type in that client ID, and there it is. But let's pick a different client ID because we'll look at the Turnitin Feedback Studio, for instance. So here I'm going to edit it, but it would bring up this same screen. I've got the client ID, it issues a deployment ID. This is what I share with the tool so that it knows my specific instance. And that when I get a launch, I'm going to get the deployment ID and the client ID, and that's how I identify the specific instance of Learn that is talking to me. I know how to bill them. I know their contact information. Somehow you have to connect an institution with your tool in your database. That's between you and the institution. And the only thing that's required is that you also have this deployment ID because that's how you're going to identify it when you receive a launch. And we have these other institution policies that we can set, allowing access to grade and membership service, what PII fields to send. All right, so that was the registration and deployment steps. Now let's look at using the tool. The reason I like the demo with Turnitin, I'm going to go into an Ultra course, but all of this would work with an original experience course. The reason I like the demo with Turnitin is because it supports all of the LTI Advantage services, plus one extra one that we'll talk about. So for instance, I've got a course, I'm in my course outline. I've created a couple of groups. I've got two groups. I've got a Thursday group and I've got a Tuesday group. They're like study groups. In Turnitin's case, the metaphor would be we have different graders for different groups of students. So we have a class of 50 students, and we have 5 different graders who can grade 10 students each as a different group. So we would set up those 10 different groups, or those 5 different groups with 10 students each as an ad hoc course group. So in the Blackboard Ultra experience, I go to our content market, which is where our third-party tools are hosted, and we have a bunch of third-party tools here. And I find my Turnitin Feedback Studio by its icon, and I launch it. And it opens up a light box or a peak panel, but I'm in an iframe, so I'm still embedded in this Learn Ultra experience, but I'm actually displaying the Turnitin UI now. And I'm going to create an assignment, and we'll call it, and we'll say, talk about turkeys. And we'll give it a grade for this assignment. And we have start dates and due dates and feedback release dates. We have some optional settings like, are you allowing late submissions, et cetera, et cetera? Do you want to do originality score on it, and so on and so forth? And where do you want to pull that originality score from? What database of documents do you want to use? So we'll submit that. And now I've got a new assignment in my course outline. And as an instructor, I can click on that assignment and it will launch me back into that tool, but for that specific assignment. And we have the jets flying over now. And what's nice about this Turnitin Feedback Studio is now I can see that I've got these 4 people in the course, and I can say that none of them have submitted anything for that assignment, and I don't have any grades. One thing I can do here is I can filter by those groups. So I can see here's just the students in the Tuesday group, and here's the students in the Thursday group. And that's a new specification that's really an extension to the names and roles service that Turnitin and Blackboard have implemented. It's a public final spec. It's out there. Other tools can implement it, but it's a nice thing to be able to get these ad hoc course groups that an LMS instructor can set up and pass that information to the tool. Now, if I log out and I log in as a student, we can look at that process from their perspective. So the student goes into their course. They see that they have an assignment, and it's due on October 12th, which is coming right up. We don't have any submissions yet. We see the due date, and we're going to launch that assignment. And now we launch back to the Turnitin Feedback Studio embedded in my course. I didn't have to open up a new window or a new tab. And I see the assignment, and I can open it up, and I can see some of the instructions and settings and so on. And then I can upload a submission. So here I upload my document. I've written this really complex, well thought out document. I'm going to choose a file. And I've written this really clever document about Abraham Lincoln. And I am going to upload that and have Turnitin Feedback Studio read it. At this point, Turnitin Feedback Studio loads that document. So here's a preview of that document. I submit it to Turnitin, and it's going to do an originality score, so basically an automatic grade on it. And so we wait for that to happen. And we see now that I've submitted that. I can look at it. There's no grade yet. But if I log back out and log back in as the instructor, which surprisingly enough is me, and I go into that course, and I go into that assignment, I see that Susie has submitted, or Sue has submitted a paper. That's exciting. I can look at the paper, I can click on it, and Turnitin opens it up in a new window, and I can read the paper, and that's all really great. And I can grade the paper right here. I can give it a grade, and I say, wow, this is really good. There's all kinds of interesting stuff here. I don't know where some of this stuff came from actually, because I thought I created this document, but it must have added some bizarre text to it. Anyhow, I can see that the similarity score is 100%. That's not good news. I can look at all kinds of sources and realize that basically Sue copied this from Wikipedia, and so the grade we'll give her is a 20 because it was a nice try, you know. And so we tab out of there, and that actually sets the grade. And so we're done. We've graded Sue. She's got a 20. We're done. We go back into Learn. And if we look at the grade book, we'll see that for the Turkey assignment, there's one grade to post. And let's have a look at that because that's interesting. Oh, sorry. That takes me back to the, let's not do it that way. Let's go into the grid view, and now we can see that Sue has a 20. So that score came back from Turnitin through the assignment and grade service and updated that grade to a 20. And now I can, we don't have this implemented yet, but there's a new specification coming out called the submission review. And what we will by the end of this year, and this is my forward-looking statement, you can't hold me to this, but our goal by the end of this year is to now I'd be able to view that submission, and it would launch me not just to turn it in Feedback Studio's dashboard, but it would launch me to the actual submission for that student, and I could analyze that and say, oh, how come they got a 20? Oh, that's because, you know, this. But I'll post that grade, and we'll log back in as Sue, and we'll see that Sue can also see that she got the grade. If she goes to grades, and we see that, oh, she got a 20 out of 100 on this assignment, and she can launch that assignment now and look at it again in Turnitin, which is pretty handy. She can say, well, how come I got a 20, you know? And it's called Feedback Studio, so I could have given her some feedback, but I didn't do that. But you know, the point is now I'm back in the Turnitin UI where the instructor did the grading, where the originality score was done automatically. And so we've got this integrated experience. So what you've seen is LTI Advantage with launching resources to a tool, with using the deep linking flow where we launched to the tool, we created an assignment, sent it back to the LMS and put it in their course outline. We have got the course roster along with any course ad hoc course groups that were created. We could filter those students by those course groups. And then we graded the resource in the tool, and the grade got sent back to the LMS's gradebook. So we've seen the full suite of LTI Advantage services, and we've talked about a few more that are coming down the pike, which is the dynamic registration, the LTI submission review, and things like that. And real quickly, because I like, because I've got a few minutes, and because I like living on the edge, we're going to just try one other thing here. I go back into that course, and now I want to create, I'm going to create a discussion board, and I'm going to call it Bobcat Discussion. And I'm going to say, talk about Bobcats. And then I'm going to do something really cool, which is I'm going to embed an LTI item. So in this case, I'm going to go to Kaltura, and I'm going to go to their media studio, and hope this all works because I haven't tested this in a couple of days. But I've created a video within Kaltura. Kaltura allows me, there's all these, you know, Panopto, Echo 360, Yuja, you know, hundreds and hundreds of wonderful video creation, editing, management software tool vendors out there. And so I've created this video within Kaltura, and I want to embed it into this discussion so that students can talk about Bobcats. I give it a name. And now, rather than putting just a link into the rich content editor, we have got the actual video, which is an LTI link. It's doing an LTI launch out to Kaltura and displaying the video in line. So let's save that. It's just not rendering right now, but it will shortly, I think. It always has in the past. This is the problem with live demos, isn't it? All right. Well, let's pretend it's working, and we'll log back into Sue one last time, and then I'll take questions because I got to wrap this up at 45 past the hour. But here's the, oh, silly me. This is one thing maybe not my favorite feature of Ultra. I always forget to make content visible to students. So let's make that content visible to students. And then we log in as Sue. And we see there's a Bobcat discussion, and we open that discussion, and we launch the LTI link to Kaltura. And for some reason, oh, here we go. Now it's finally rendering. And so now I can watch this video that the instructor created and embedded within the discussion, and I can say, wow, that's really cool. And that, my friends, is today's presentation on LTI Advantage with Blackboard Learn. We'll stop sharing and I will leave it open to questions. I see Victor's written something, but I haven't read it yet.
It's an agreement with you that eventually all of the LMS vendors are probably going to migrate towards implementing both dynamic registration and global registration in some form.
Yeah, yeah.
Because they suit different use cases, right?
Right, exactly, definitely. And the Moodles and Sakai's of the world can never really do global registration because they're open source products that people are self-hosting, and there's no organization out there that is going to support a central service for global registration, right? There's not some like philanthropic or organization out there. But the D2Ls and the Canvases and the Blackboards of the world, the Schoologies, since they're for-profit companies, you know, central services, cloud-based services is the way to go for doing things like registration. Thank you for that, Victor. Any other questions, comments? All right, well, it's been a delight having you all here, and the presentation was recorded, and we will see you at another session of the IMS Lilly conference. Thank you very much.